Hello and welcome everybody to this month's vlog. A year ago now, just over a year ago, had a conversation with Toby about being on a clinical trial, and we agreed to meet a year later to actually monitor the progress and to get her feedback on being on a clinical trial study. I think it's really important this because we're living in the age where there are a lot of potential new medications coming out for people with MPNs. And I think they can't come out without people being on a clinical trial or a study. And Toby, thank you for agreeing to come and join me again. And perhaps let's start by just recapping on briefly on, how you came to be on the trial and where you are now with it.
So I went on the trial, which was, this began because I was on hydroxycarbamide. I was doing really well on hydroxycarbamide, but I think there was something in my mind that maybe there was something else out there. A lot of new drugs had come on stream, being approved for use with PV. And I just thought to myself, this is great. Some hydroxy is managing my numbers, my platelets are down, I'm feeling great. But was there something else out there that could make a difference to the outcome or the pathway of the disease? And I guess it was a nagging doubt that I didn't want someone to turn around to me on my medical team, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, and say, oh, I really wish we'd thought about changing onto another drug before, we could have a different outcome. So I was the one that was kind of moving to change the drug. And then these conversations went on with the team for about a year. And by that point, the Mithridate trial had broadened its eligibility criteria, and I was eligible to apply. And that's how I got on. So there's a bit of me that thinks I kind of take the rap, because although the team were incredibly encouraging about being on the trial, no one was pushing me to change the drug that I was on. So I've kind of entered the trial with a sense of I was the one that was agitating for change. And, if it all goes pear-shaped, maybe that's going to come back on me.
I think you raise a very valid point there about how we as patients are our best advocates. Um,
I think that's really true. I don't think you can, I think you can only really get the best treatment if you remain really alert. And even being on a trial, even being at Guy's, I do think you have to really keep your wits about you, because stuff happens. I nearly ended up with an additional bone marrow biopsy earlier in this year, just because I had a note from one of the nurses saying, oh, you're due a bone marrow biopsy and we've booked you in. And I thought, I'm sure I would have remembered if I needed an extra one of these. And unfortunately, I questioned it. And of course, I didn't need a bone marrow biopsy at that point in the trial. I had one at the beginning, I'll have one at the end, but I certainly wasn't having an extra one in the middle. So you do need to keep your wits about you, but I think you do have to advocate for yourself. I think it's really important. And I understand people may not want to do that and engage with that process. But I think it's worth remembering that if you are perhaps a bit overwhelmed by what's going on, or you feel a bit anxious or scared, like MPN Voice has got plenty of information. It's got buddy schemes. You have your clinical nurse specialists. These are people you can talk to. And I think then taking charge of your own care, even if you're in the best gold standard facility, is definitely worth doing.
I think it's also important to know that you aren't alone, because I think going into this, sometimes people feel, what have I let myself in for? And
I think you always feel, what have I let myself in for?
but
But
also it's fear, a lot of it's
yeah,
fear of the unknown, actually.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and
I don't know
perhaps
about you, but I've cried in the middle of the night, um, you know, uh, being frightened and a sense of being out of control. Um, but there are ways through that. And I think that's kind of a normal feeling.
yeah,
If we just went, oh, sure, whatever drug's
yeah,
going, I've got this
yeah,
disease I don't understand.
yeah.
Of course, we're not like that. But the help is out there, and I think it's just a question of having the courage to reach out. And
I
there are
think,
nice people on the end of
yeah,
that.
I think courage is the word actually. But also look at the end game. The end game is that, for all of us with MPNs, there will be a choice of medication. I mean, certainly for PV, there's not much choice really at the moment. There are 3 or 4 drugs, but MF, there are new drugs coming down the line. I think it's all a very exciting time actually, and the future to me
Yeah.
has never looked brighter. But I tell you what, would be really helpful to just look at where you were then and where you are now, because a year's gone by, and has the trial completed? Because that's something you thought might happen, and perhaps you could tell us a little about that.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to put my hands up and say, I don't know whether it was wishful thinking, but I said, oh, the trial's for a year. Of course, it's not for a year. It's for 3 years. And I think I remember saying, oh, I didn't think I'd be sort of just chucked off ruxolitinib at the end of the year. I'm not. I'm still here. It's 3 years. Um, and I guess the last year's been a bit up and down. And I think that's to be expected. And I don't know, that's not to do with the trial per se. It's not necessarily to do with ruxolitinib. I think lots of people will have had this experience. But one of the things with ruxolitinib is in trying to control my platelets, which were okay controlled, not as well as hydroxy was doing, but they were not terrible. Of course, what ruxolitinib does is also it does you do run the risk of you becoming anemic. So my hemoglobin and my hematocrit counts were coming down as they were trying to up my ruxolitinib to counter the rising platelets. So we had platelets going up, more increasing the ruxolitinib dose. Consequently, I was getting anemic. The numbers weren't great, but you'll be told, well, you can manage on much lower numbers, but I felt rubbish. And it was really affecting my quality of life. I just felt washed out and exhausted. I'm sure anybody, who's had that anemia or low ferritin levels will know that feeling. And it was frustrating because I've been feeling so well. So the effects of all of that were that I negotiated. And this is where I think you need to be your own advocate, and said, look, I need to take that dose down again. It was only it was a tweak. And there was a bit of toing and froing. And I said, look, let's look at my numbers. And that's again where you need to take charge. They were okay. The platelets were at an okay level. My hemoglobin was coming up, so I didn't feel so rubbishy. Can we strike a deal and go back to the dose that I was on? And the team agreed, and I just felt so much better. So my platelets were marginally higher than ideal, but not terrible. And I really got my life back. So the thing about that was, of course, that any change in the dosage, you have to go back to be monitored. And so therefore you have to go back more often than the trial schedule. So the trial schedule is every 3 months, once you've got over the initial testing and monitoring. But in fact, I've been up at Guy's 6 times this year. So with all the issues that go with being up there for absolutely ages because of the way things work. So that was one of the things. So it was a bit rocky in terms of how I felt and managing the dosage and having to go up for additional visits. So that was one thing. And the second change was that one of the things you get with ruxolitinib is that it can increase your cholesterol. And my cholesterol was going up, not terribly, but it was, there were question marks. And I guess one of the things with having an MPN is that sometimes you're looking at the margins of things that may not be an issue if you don't have an MPN and you're perfectly healthy, but actually come into play far more if you've got an MPN. So what your blood pressure's doing, heart rates, statin, and cholesterol, all of these things. And I was a bit resistant because I'm usually a bit resistant to drugs about going on to statins, not terribly keen. But actually, my cholesterol was elevated enough that it made sense. Again, it's being pragmatic, it's making sense to go onto the statins and just lower another risk element. And I know you spoke to Patrick about the Q risk 3 some time ago. And I think that also was informing whether or not I should go onto statins.
Been quite a journey, hasn't it? But you still remain very positive about completing this. What is the sort of outcome you're hoping for yourself?
Well, I guess that I mean, I would like to have my numbers really well controlled. So, the question with ruxolitinib remains, can they control my platelets, or can the drug control my platelets as well as hydroxy, but not have these knock-on effects in terms of becoming anemic? So that's the question still there. I still have, a question in mind. Was this a good thing? I'm not going on the trial. Absolutely. It's important. It's really important. And I would never have known. And I look at the kind of questions that people raise, for example, on the NPM forum on Health Unlocked about cholesterol, about statins, about a raft of things, which for me aren't an issue, because if I raise them, they're immediately dealt with. Being on the trial, I can talk to somebody and they're already testing, they're already looking for this, they're already responding to it. So I can see some of the issues, some of the battles and challenges people are having in trying to get care and trying to understand. I don't have that because I have a team of people that are already on it. And so that's been good. So I feel kind of cared for, I think, and quite comforted in a way I'm being on the trial. And that's been a good experience. Outcome, I don't know with the ruxolitinib, because, we're asking the question, is it going to change the long-term outcome? Is it going to change a possible pathway? I'm not sure we can answer that. But I feel like it's been good that I just haven't sat there and said, I'm on hydroxy, it works, I'm just going to sit here and keep taking it. That I've actually been able to explore another avenue, explore what's happening in a really safe way and cared for way. So that's been good. So I guess I don't know what the next year is going to hold. And having said that, I've had these ups and downs in terms of the drug. I may well have had that on hydroxy.
Absolutely. I mean,
I can't. I don't know what would have happened. Maybe something else would have happened.
well, that's it. We just don't know. And obviously, of course, as we progress and get older, you get other health things coming in, which, as you rightly say, they're not necessarily part of the MPN journey. They're part of just general
And I
getting
think
older.
the key thing about being on the trial is, of course, there's other stuff that can come in just because it can come in because we get older or whatever. I feel like that's been taken on board, that they're already responsive as part of that trial experience to these other things. So I can really see that I haven't had to battle in any way. They're ahead of the game on that. So it's, yes, there's the old waiting around business and, endless days, whole days up at Guy's. Not much fun, but on balance, it feels like it's taken up my life. But obviously, I've only been 6 times. So, and some of this has got nothing to do with the trial or waiting for drugs. It wouldn't matter whether it was Rux or hydroxy. I still would have been hanging around all day. So it's been a really good experience, actually. Given what I've said about ups and downs and statins and drug changes, it's definitely been worth doing, really worth doing. We'll see what the next year holds, but I'd recommend it.
I would say thank you, a huge thank you to you. And I look forward to talking to you in a year's time and just seeing, where you are in a year's time. But you're absolutely right. The best thing we can all do as patients is be our own advocates and consider, when there's a suitable trial. And I think you pointed out to me at the beginning, don't be alarmed if you can put yourself forward for a trial, but for some reason that you don't know about, you might not meet the criteria. And, that's a safety net that anybody conducting the trial has, is to making sure the patient is right to do the trial. And sometimes I think people can be a little disappointed when they've put their hand up and said, I'm going to do it, and they're not actually suitable for it. But it's great to hear your story, and I really look forward to continuing to hear where you are next year, because then it will be nearly 3 years, 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, I think there's another bone marrow biopsy on the
Oh dear.
horizon. I don't know. I've had three. It's all fine.
Yeah.
It's really all fine.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Yeah, I'll tell you where I'm at.
Lovely. Thank you, Toby. Lovely to
Pleasure.
see you.